Where do you see Wikipedia in 10 years, 100 years,
Mm.
and 1,000
Dun,
years?
dun, dun. Right. So 10 years, I would say pretty much the same. Like we're not going to become TikTok, with entertainment, scroll by video, humor, and blah, blah, blah. An encyclopedia. I think in 10 years, we probably will have a lot more AI supporting tools like I've talked about, and probably your search experience will be you can ask a question and get the answer rather than, from our body of work.
So search and discovery, a little bit improved, interface,
Yeah,
some of the...
all that. I always say one of the things that most people won't notice, because already they don't notice it, is the growth of Wikipedia in the languages of the developing world.
Mm.
So you probably don't speak Swahili, so you're probably not checking out that Swahili Wikipedia is doing very well. And it is doing very well. And I think that kind of growth is actually super important. It's super interesting. But most people won't notice that.
If we can just link on that,
Yeah.
if we could, do you think there's so much incredible translation work is being done with AI, with language models? Do you think that can accelerate
Yeah, I do.
Wikipedia? So you start with the
Yeah.
basic draft of the translation of articles and then
Yeah.
build on top of that.
So what I used to say is like machine translation for many years wasn't much use to the community because it just wasn't good enough. As it's gotten better, it's tended to be a lot better in what we might call economically important languages. That's because the corpus that they train on and all of that. So to translate from English to Spanish, if you've tried Google Translate recently, Spanish to English is what I would do. It's pretty good. Like it's actually not bad. It used to be half a joke, and then for a while it was kind of like, well, you can get the gist of something, and now it's like actually it's pretty good. However, we've got a huge Spanish community who write in native Spanish, so they're able to use it and they find it useful, but they're writing. But if you tried to do English to Zulu, where there's not that much investment. Like there's loads of reasons to invest in English to Spanish because they're both huge economically important languages. Zulu, not so much. So for those smaller languages, it was just still terrible. My understanding is it's improved dramatically, and also because the new methods of training don't necessarily involve identical corpuses to try to match things up, but rather reading and understanding with tokens and large language models, and then reading and understanding, and then you get a much richer. Anyway, apparently it's quite improved. So I think that now it is quite possible that these smaller language communities are going to say, oh, well, finally, I can put something in English and I can get out Zulu that I feel comfortable sharing with my community because it's actually good enough, or I can edit it a bit here and there. So I think that's huge. So I do think that's going to happen a lot, and that's going to accelerate again what will remain to most people an invisible trend, but that's the growth in all these other languages. So then move on to 100 years.
I was starting to get scary.
Well, the only thing I say about 100 years is like we've built the Wikimedia Foundation, and we run it in a quite cautious and financially conservative and careful way. So every year we build our reserves. Every year we put aside a little bit more money. We also have the endowment fund, which we just passed 100 million. That's a completely separate fund, with a separate board, so that it's not just like a big fat bank account for some future profligate CEO to blow through. The foundation will have to get the approval of a second order board to be able to access that money. And that board can make other grants through the community and things like that. So the point of all that is I hope and believe that we're building, in a financially stable way, that we can weather various storms along the way, so that hopefully we're not taking the kind of risks. And by the way, we're not taking too few risks either. That's always hard. I think the Wikimedia Foundation and Wikipedia will exist in 100 years. If anybody exists in 100 years, we'll be there.
Do you think the internet just looks unpredictably different? The web?
I do. I mean, I think right now, this sort of enormous step forward we've seen and has become public in the last year of the large language models really is something else, right? It's really interesting. And you and I have both talked today about the flaws and the limitations, but still, it's someone who's been around technology for a long time, it's sort of that feeling of the first time I saw a web browser, the first time I saw the iPhone, like the first time the internet was like really usable on a phone, and it's like, wow, that's a step change difference. There's a few other,
Maybe a Google search.
Google search
I
was
don't remember
actually
if the
one.
first
Yeah,
search.
because I remember Alta Vista was kind of cool for a while, then it just got more and more useless because the algorithm wasn't good, and it's like, oh, Google search now, like the internet works again.
Yeah.
And so large language model, it feels like that to me. Like, oh wow, this is something new and like really pretty remarkable, and it's going to have some downsides, like the negative use case. People in the area who are experts, they're giving a lot of warnings, and I don't know enough to. I'm not that worried, but I'm a pathological optimist. But I do see some like really low hanging fruit bad things that can happen. So my example is, how about some highly customized spam, where the email that you receive isn't just like misspelled words and like trying to get through filters, but actually is a targeted email to you that knows something about you by reading your LinkedIn profile and writes a plausible email that will get through the filters. And it's like suddenly, that's a new problem. That's going to be interesting.
Is there just on the Wikipedia editing side, does it make the job of the volunteer, of the editor, more difficult if in a world where larger and larger percentage of the internet is written by an LLM?
So one of my predictions, and we'll see, ask me again in 5 years how this panned out, is that in a way, this will strengthen the value and importance of some traditional brands.
Yeah.
So if I see a news story and it's from the Wall Street Journal, from the New York Times, from Fox News, I know what I'm getting, and I trust it to whatever extent I might have, trust or distrust in any of those. And if I see a brand new website that looks plausible, but I've never heard of it, and it could be machine-generated content that may be full of errors, I think I'll be more cautious. I think I'm more interested. And we can also talk about this around photographic evidence. So obviously, there will be scandals where major media organizations get fooled by a fake photo.
Mm-hmm.
However, if I see a photo of the recent was the Pope wearing an expensive puffer jacket, I'm going to go, yeah, that's amazing that a fake like that could be generated. But my immediate thought is not, oh, so the Pope's dipping into the money, eh? Partly because this particular Pope doesn't seem like he'd be the type.
My favorite is extensive pictures of Joe Biden and Donald Trump hanging out and having fun together.
Yeah. Brilliant. So I think people will care about the provenance of a photo. And if you show me a photo and you say, yeah, this photo is from Fox News, even though I don't necessarily think that's the highest, but I'm like, well, it's a news organization and they're going to have journalists and they're going to make sure the photo is what it purports to be. That's very different from a photo randomly circulating on Twitter. Whereas I would say 15 years ago, a photo randomly circulating on Twitter, in most cases, the worst you could do, and this did happen, is misrepresent the battlefield. So like, oh, here's a bunch of injured children. Look what Israel's done. But actually, it wasn't Israel. It was another case 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. That has happened. That has always been around. But now we can have much more specifically constructed, plausible-looking photos that if I just see them circulating on Twitter, I'm going to go, just don't know. Not sure. Like, I can make that in 5 minutes. So,
well, I also hope that it's kind of like what you're writing about in your book, that we could also have citizen journalists that have a stable, verifiable trust that builds up.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be New York Times with this organization. That you could be in an organization of one, as long as it's stable and carries through time and it builds up or builds up.
No, I agree. But the one thing I've said in the past, and this depends on who that person is and what they're doing, but it's like, I think my credibility, my general credibility in the world should be the equal of a New York Times reporter.
Yeah.
So if something happens and I witness it and I write about it, people are going to go, well, Jimmy Wales said it. That's just like if a New York Times reporter said it. I'm going to tend to think he didn't just make it up. Mm-hmm. Truth is, nothing interesting ever happens around me. I don't go to war zones. I don't go to big press conferences. I don't interview Putin and Zelensky, right?
Mhm.
So to an extent, yes. Whereas I do think for other people, those traditional models of credibility um, are really, really important. And then there is this sort of citizen journalism. I don't know if you think of what you do as journalism. I kind of think it is, but
Yeah.
you do interviews, you do long form interviews. And I think people, like if you come and you say, right, here's my tape, but you wouldn't hand out a tape. Like I just gestured to you as if I'm handing you a cassette tape. But if you put it
A
into your
VHS tape.
podcast, here's my interview with Zelensky,
Mhm.
and people aren't going to go, yeah, how do we know? That could be a deep fake.
Yeah.
Like you could have faked that, because people are like, well, no, like you're a well-known podcaster and you do interview interesting people, and yeah, you wouldn't think that. So that your brand becomes really important. Whereas if suddenly, and I've seen this already, I've seen sort of video with subtitles in English, and apparently the Ukrainian was the same, and it was Zelensky saying something really outrageous.
Mhm.
And I'm like, yeah, don't believe that. Like, I don't think he said that in a meeting with, whatever. I think that's Russian propaganda or probably just trolls.
Yeah, and then building platforms and mechanisms of how that trust can be verified.
Yeah.
Whether, if something appears on a Wikipedia page, that means something. If something appears on, like, say, my Twitter account, that means something. That
Yeah.
means
Yeah.
this particular human, have signed off on it.
Yeah. Exactly.
And then the trust you have in this particular human transfers to the piece of content.
Mhm.
And then
Yeah.
hopefully there's millions of people with different metrics of trust.
Yeah.
And then you could see that there's a certain kind of bias in the set of conversations you're having. So maybe, okay, I trust this person to have this kind of bias, and I'll go to this other person to have
Mhm.
this other kind of bias, and I can integrate them in
Yeah.
this kind of way, just like
Yeah.
you said with Fox News and
Yeah.
whatever
Wall
else,
Street Journal, New York
MSNBC.
Times, like they've all got their, like where they sit.